In the early 20th century, Toronto was in a quest to eliminate poverty, and its main target was an area right in the heart of the city, a neighborhood that stood there for over a century. For decades, it had been trying to erase it with no success, until the 1940s, when it came with an audacious plan: replace it with a monument to itself. And chances are, if you ever visited Toronto, you've taken a photo in front of it. This is the story of the ward. To understand the ward, we have to go back to Toronto in the 1840s. The city was growing fast, and newcomers needed somewhere to land. The place many ended up was a cluster of blocks in the heart of the city, bounded by Queen Street to the south, College Street to the north, Yonge Street to the east, and College Avenue, now University Avenue, to the west. Officially, it was called St. John's Ward, but everyone called it the Ward. For the people who settled there, it was the first place in a new country that would take them in. The first to arrive were black refugees traveling the Underground Railroad out of the United States, and Irish survivors of the Great Famine. By the 1880s, those communities had begun to move on, and new waves were arriving. Eastern European Jews fleeing persecution, Italian laborers, Chinese workers who had helped build the Canadian Pacific Railway. Each group built what it could, then moved on. By the early 20th century, around 11,000 people lived within its few blocks. Boarding houses took in new arrivals who had nowhere else to go, and the neighborhood grew around them. The Eaton's factory complex dominated the eastern edge. It was one of the largest employers in the city and drew thousands of ward residents into its factory floor. Around it, the neighborhood flourished. Synagogues and churches of a dozen denominations, art venues, schools, tailoring shops, barber shops, and restaurants lined the streets. But the conditions weren't glamorous. Houses had leaky roofs and poor sanitation. Multiple families shared single rooms. The streets were unpaved, the back lanes muddy. Tuberculosis was common. For most residents, the ward was the bottom of the city, the place you lived until you could afford to leave. It was labeled by many as a slum. These poor conditions were documented by artists at the time. Lauren Harris, one of the founding members of the Group of Seven and born into one of Toronto's wealthiest families, spent years walking those streets with fellow artist James Edward Hervey MacDonald, making pencil sketches for paintings of corner stores, backyards, and workers' houses. Harris later wrote that he was drawn there by an innate curiosity and wonder. His ward paintings now hang in the Art Gallery of Ontario. But while the ward persevered, Toronto was forming a very different opinion of it. In July 1911, Dr. Charles Hastings, Toronto's newly appointed medical health officer, published a report that would change the ward's fate. Hastings had spent months sending inspectors into the neighborhood's homes. The Central District, the heart of the ward, was the most densely populated area they examined. 11,645 people lived on 142 acres, 82 persons to the acre. What they found was genuine. 108 homes were declared unfit for habitation, 63 tenement houses identified, 97 rear houses, dwellings hidden behind other buildings on back lanes so narrow that a tall man with arms outstretched could touch both walls. 559 families across the inspected districts had no water inside their homes at all. One rear tenement housed 6 families and shared a single water tap among 40 people. His report contained something the city would later turn a blind eye to. A section titled "Slum Dwellers Not There from Choice" stated plainly that there could be no greater lie than the idea that people living in slums were okay with their condition. The inspectors were welcomed into homes. Residents told them it was time someone came to see how they had to live. The ward's residents wanted better and said so directly. Hastings' recommendations reflected this. He called for, among other things, good housing bylaws, suburban housing with affordable rapid transit, and proper city planning. But the same report that advocated for residents also contained the seed of a different argument. In 1914, Hastings complained about European workers crowding into houses, sleeping in their work clothes, and never cleaning. Their way was not the Toronto's way. The report's language was taken further by others. Toronto newspapers described the ward as a canker and a menace. By the 1920s, the Globe called the population growth at the neighborhood a spread of moral leprosy. The conditions were real, but in the public narrative the report had unleashed, their cause was increasingly the people who lived in them. And this would matter enormously. Improving the ward would have required investment, enforcement, and political will. But the city took the easy way out. If the ward's problem could be blamed onto the residents, it would do it. And the simplest solution was to remove them. It required only a decision and a justification that had already been written. As a result of the report, in the years that followed, the city demolished hundreds of substandard houses with no replacement housing built. The residents were simply pushed out and left to find their own way. The Hastings report was the most authoritative official record saying that the neighborhood was a problem, written in the language of science and public health, that politicians could and would point to for decades to come. The early demolitions were only the beginning of a pattern. Through the 1920s and 30s, the ward continued to shrink. Toronto General Hospital had already taken land from the ward's northern edge. Old City Hall rose in its eastern boundary. Private developers bought up blocks and replaced them with commercial buildings. The Jewish and Italian communities, already diminished, drifted west towards Spadina. What remained, centered on Elizabeth Street, was largely the Chinese community, Toronto's first Chinatown, which had taken root there in the early 1900s. With the ward weakened, the city decided it was time for its final move. In 1943, a council report recommended the southern half of the neighborhood, the blocks home to the Chinatown, as the site of a new city hall and civic square. At that time, Chinese Canadian owned 55% of the property in the lower ward, and they organized against the expropriation. Merchants and property owners banded together with community leader Jean Lumb through the Save Chinatown Committee. Its members marched, lobbied, and launched a lawsuit. In the end, they lost. In 1947, Toronto voters approved the land acquisition in a referendum. The city expropriated properties at nominal market value, but as most residents and business operators were renters, they received nothing. The city's stated justification was straightforward. Old City Hall, opened in 1899, had become too small for Toronto's growing municipal government, and more office space was needed. But what the city built on the ward's land was considerably more. No time was wasted. Between 1947 and 1958, 2/3 of the first Chinatown were demolished. Restaurants, grocery stores, clan associations, music societies, newspaper offices, all gone. Chinese Canadian families who had held properties on Elizabeth Street for half a century watched their buildings come down. Some businesses could not afford to relocate and simply closed. Those that survived moved west along Dundas to Spadina Avenue, where they rebuilt. That neighborhood is what Torontonians today call Chinatown. Meanwhile, the city turned its attention to what would replace them. In 1958, Toronto launched an international architecture competition for the new City Hall. Over 510 entries arrived from 42 countries. The winning design, announced on September 26, 1958, came from Finnish architect Viljo Revel. 2 curved towers flanking a central council chamber, rising above a vast civic plaza. Construction began in 1961, and the Nathan Phillips Square, along with the new City Hall, opened 4 years later, on September 13, 1965. The ward, which had absorbed every wave of newcomers the city had produced from over a century, was gone. In its place stood one of the most recognizable buildings in Toronto, a monument to itself. Today, Nathan Phillips Square draws millions of visitors a year. They skate on the rink, take photos with the Toronto sign, and bring the new year in front of the building that became the city's own logo. There is a peace garden on the square dedicated to the victims of Hiroshima. There are sculptures, an open-air stage, and many cultural celebrations. There are also 2 small plaques acknowledging Toronto's first Chinatown. They were installed in 2007, removed during square renovations, and permanently reinstalled in 2014, 60 years after the demolition began. They sit near the Winston Churchill statue, close to where Elizabeth Street once ran. Other immigrant neighborhoods that survive, like Kensington Market, Chinatown on Spadina, Little Italy on College Street, became some of the most visited and vibrant parts of the city. They draw tourists, anchor local economies, and give Toronto much of the cultural texture it takes pride in today. The ward had all of those ingredients. It had the density, the diversity, the street life, the history. And what it might have become, no one can say. If you like this content and would like to learn more about the environment that surrounds us, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to this channel. Stay tuned for more!